Now, in the speech I made, I identified a whole series of choices I think we need to look at. If you're a young person, you leave school, you get a job, you stay at home with mum and dad, you're not entitled to a housing benefit. If you leave school, go on the dole, you are entitled to housing benefit. We do send some signals through the benefit system that are potentially perverse, and we need to think about that. And I do think the focus on working age welfare, rather than going after pensioners, who I think if you've worked hard all your life, you should retire with dignity and security, and this government has made sure that's the case.
The problem is, though, that you and George Osborne are actually trying to restrain government spending, cut it back more than Margaret Thatcher ever achieved. And even in her time in office, what we saw was a widening disparity between rich and poor. Is it your intention as Prime Minister to narrow that gap?
Well, I want us to be a fair country, but fairness to me is principally about if you work hard, if you do the right thing, if you put in, are you treated fairly by the system? And I think one of the really important things...
So is that then devil take the hindmost?
No, not at all. No, absolutely not at all. We have a huge responsibility to help the poorest in our country, to help the frail, to help the elderly, to help the disabled. If you take, for instance, benefits to the disabled, the amount we spend is going to go up. It's not going to go down. But I think there's a really important issue about how we talk about fairness. Fairness, of course, is about how you help the poorest in our country, but fairness is also about if I work hard, if I do the right thing, is the system on my side? Is it fair in that respect?
But you look in the Financial Times today, there's a report from Sheffield Hallam University looking at the impact per worker of the welfare changes. Poor area like Blackpool going to lose over £900 a year per worker. Rich area like Cambridge, just over 200. I mean, that's going to increase the disparity between the haves and the have-nots.
But I think that raises a very important question. I would say that Labour tested to destruction the idea that simply through larger and larger increases in the welfare bill, you could heal the north-south divide. You can't. What we've done, actually what Labour did, is create a more welfare-dependent country. And what we've got to do is make sure we can't afford the state we have today. We need a smaller state and a bigger private sector. But Adam, this is really important because this didn't happen to the same extent in the early 1980s, but it is happening now. What we're seeing is actually growth in private sector jobs. Over the last 3 years, we've seen the creation of 1.25 million private sector jobs. That's very, very important. And unemployment has actually been falling in recent months rather than rising.
But the people who are left behind, the people who don't have work, the people who are dependent on benefits, are going to be worse off in Cameron's Britain, aren't they?
No, I don't accept that either. I mean, if you look back over the last 5 years, people on out-of-work benefits have seen their incomes go up by 20%, whereas people in work have seen their incomes only go up by 10%. That's because so many people in work have had no pay rise, have had a pay freeze. Some people have had to take a pay cut. And that's why the decision we took to say that in-work benefits, the key in-work benefits, were only going to go up by 1%. That's so important because, again, it's an issue of fairness. You shouldn't be better off out of work with a bigger increase in your benefits than you are in work, working hard, trying to do the right thing for your family.
Just on your concept of fairness, because I think it is important given the hard times we're in. Closing that gap, is that important to you between the people at the bottom and the people at the top?
I do want to see us have a fairer country, and the gap does matter. But I think we also have to define fairness in a range of ways. One sense of fairness is, are we doing right by the poorest, the frail, the most needy in our country? Another definition of fairness, which does matter, is some of these gaps, as you say. I would particularly look at the gap between the bottom and the middle. I think that's particularly important. And then a third part of fairness, absolutely vital, is if you work hard, you put in, does the system treat you fairly? And that is what I think, when you ask people what's become unfair about Britain, they will say, what is unfair is I'm working hard, but there are people who are swinging the lead on welfare. There are people who are not making fair choices.
Not very many. I mean, statistically, not very many, if you look at it.
Well, I don't accept that. I think that,
very small percentage of benefits, I think less than 2%.
No, well, if you look at, for instance, the work that's been done going through people who are in receipt of incapacity benefit, the old incapacity benefit, what we're finding is actually there's a lot of opportunity to help people who were just left on that benefit. Now, some of them, I think, probably were, happy not to be in work, but lots of them would love to work, would like the opportunity, but they weren't getting the help. And this is where I think there's a tender part to this tough approach.
I was talking to a woman today who fears she's going to lose her mobility allowance because she can walk 50 yards, she can walk 20 yards rather than 50 yards. As a result, she'll lose her vehicle and she'll lose her job and her connection with the outside world. I mean, that doesn't help anybody,
Well, of
does
course,
it?
I can't comment on that individual case, but 2 points to you. First of all, the money going into disability benefit is going to go up, not down. Second point is that the new disability benefit, the personal independence payment, is going to be based on a proper face-to-face conversation with someone and a proper medical checkup. You know, disability living allowance, what happened was, and it was a good benefit in some ways, what happened was you filled out the form, but once you'd filled out the form and got the benefit, you were parked on it and left on it for year after year. What we should be doing is trying to help people, not to ask what can't you do, but to ask what can you do.